Thank you for that. Allow me to share my screen. And again, Dennis, I would request that you enable me to share. Sorry. Just enable screen sharing. Thank you. Basically, this is a Microsoft Excel. And I know most of you are familiar with Microsoft Excel. And basically what I mentioned is that in Microsoft Excel, as you'll be doing your business data analytics, it's important that you understand that the data that you have, the data that you want to manipulate, it must be accurate at all times. And again, that is why I'm going to introduce what we call data validation. And if you can see from my screen, I have, this is a workbook, and I have a worksheet called data validation. This column is meant, we are going to capture the employment numbers. We are just assuming that we are capturing data. And probably our next course of action is to analyze this data so that we can get some results, and thereafter we'll be able to make some insights. Then this column, that is column B, it is meant to capture departments. This other column is meant to capture the date of birth, that is the date of birth of employee. This other column is meant to capture the employment date. This other column is meant to capture the gender. And of course, this other marital status, that is whether married, single. And probably assuming that you also want to capture age, we can capture the same. Then academic qualification, and finally the basic pay. Basically, this is just for a test to introduce what we call data validation. In data validation, it's important to understand that it is important to have controls when you are capturing data. Like, for example, here we are saying that if we are capturing employees' details, assuming that our employee numbers are numeric in nature, like, for example, now the first employee is 1012, that is the employment number. And probably we have a department, he belongs to a department called ICT. Then the date of birth, assuming that the date of birth is 1st of January 20, that is 1800. Yeah, you can see that the system is accepting the date of birth as the 1st of January, the year 1800. And that is why I want us to discuss about data validation. Assuming that employment date, I capture employment date as 1st of the year 2025. So again, it is possible that we can enter the same information, but remember this data that we are capturing, it is not actually valid, it's not correct. Then for example, gender, you decide to type gender as male, and probably you make a mistake. So you realize that we are capturing data, but of course, this data, it's not correct data. So when we talk of data validation, we are simply saying that we want to validate the data that we are going to capture under the employment number. We are going to validate the data that we are going to enter under department. We're going to validate the data that we're going to enter as the date of birth. We're also going to validate the data that we're going to enter as gender. The same case with marital status, the same case for basic salary. Now, when you are preparing a data set, like for example, we know that the employees we are capturing, they belong to a certain department. And again, of course, we know that gender, our employees, they either belong to male or female gender. And of course, probably just allow me for today to say that under marital status, we have married and single. And of course, age, it's purely numeric. Then probably academic qualification, we have diploma, degree, master's, and all that. So I have another sheet here, we call it setup. Now, under setup, I will be in a position to define my departments. Like for instance, I'm saying that we have a department called IT, audit, accounts, and probably we have employees who belong to the management. Yeah, so I will be able now here to specify basically the departments that probably we have in our company. Then under gender, I can opt to use male or female, or alternatively, I can decide to use F for female and M for male. Then under marital status, we have single and married. Then under academic qualifications, we have diploma, degree, master's, and PhD. So let me just demonstrate now how we can validate data. Like for example, now we know that employment number, assuming that the length of our employment number is 5 characters. And any employment number that is captured outside the 5 character, then it is assumed to be what? To be not valid. So now what we'll do here is that we will come and select the column that contains the fields where we'll capture the employment number. Then we go to data validation. Just allow me to. Now under data, there is this option called validate data validation. Now, when you click on data validation, you will actually realize that the system, we have what we call the validation criteria. So under validation criteria, you can either allow any value, you can allow whole number, you can allow a decimal number, you can allow a list, you can allow date, time, and even text length. So now we are assuming that our employment number, it can be, let me say it's a text, and we want to limit it to 5 characters. So what we'll say, we'll come to validation and say that we want to validate the data that we are going to enter under employment number to be of a text. And this text must be what? We have functions here. You can say between, not between, equals to, not equals to, and the rest. But let's just say that it should be equals to how many characters? 5. So what does that mean? It means that when we click OK, that when I'm capturing my details, assuming that I say my first employment number, I'm employee 0001. These are how many characters? These are 4. So when I press enter or when I want to proceed, the system will not allow. It will tell me that the value, this value does not match the data validation restriction defined in this cell. So what I need to do is that I need to try. So if I enter the employee number as 001, of course, the system will do what? The system should accept. Just a minute, let's go back to data validation. That is data validation. We said data validation. There's the text length to be equals to 5. Okay. Let me say, just a minute. So you find that now this data, it has actually accepted. Now under departments, basically we know that we have some departments that we can capture. We want actually now to use what we call a list. Like now I will highlight the departments, then I go to data validation. I say that I want to allow a list. That is, I want to allow a list in the departments. But now the source of this list, it's actually this setup worksheet that contains the department. So I will definitely now come and select the departments. So when I click OK, then it means that if I want to enter a department, because now I've already specified the list, I will simply come here and just select the department. Rather than coming here and typing, for example, now department, probably now I typed department as ICT, but in small letter. So you find that now this one is going to aid us to ensure that the data that we select or the data that we enter, it actually falls within a certain range, or we select it from the list, which means we are actually improving the accuracy. We know the one which maybe we hire, then he must be above 18 years, and at the same time, he should not be above probably, let me say 50. So now if you look at that mathematics, then it means that employment, that is the date of birth of this employee, should be greater than what? That is at least 18 years. We talk of 200 and 2002. And again, probably this employee, assuming that we say that the date of birth should be probably 1990. So we are just specifying a range, like the employees we are recruiting, their date of birth must fall between 1990 and 2002. So what we'll again do is that we'll come to data validation, validate data. Then because now this is a date, we say that allow a date that is between. You can use any of the functions, that either between, not between, equals to, but the ideal function here is between. Now, for example, we talk of what? 1st of January, 1990. Then the end date, the last date, probably again, we talk of 1st of January, the year 2002. So again, something that I did mention is that we have what we call the input message. Remember, like here, when I just click OK, and I happen to enter a date that is outside what we have specified. So the system will display an error like that, Microsoft error. This value does not match the data validation restriction defined in this cell. So alternatively, what we need to do, we need to retry. So if I enter a date that falls between that, like for example, I say the employee was born in 2005. Employee was born, let me just say 10th of September, the year 2000. Then the system should actually accept. The same applies to the employment, that is the date of employment. Then again, gender, we already know that we have 2 genders. So we can also just highlight, we go to data validation, then we pick data validation. Then here now, we want to use the data that is in the list. That is actually now in our setup. Then we pick, that is gender, that is M or F. Then for marital status, we also highlight, and we know that our data validation falls under our list, which again, we already have it in one of the setup sheets, that is single married. Then under age, probably you say that, assuming that you want to capture numbers, we also saying that the age should be between 18 and probably 40. So you again go to data validation, then you say validation. Now this time around, we are now going to take what? A whole number. And the ideal logic here is between, let's say 18 and 40. So what I meant by the input message, sometimes you may wish that when you go to that particular cell, the system should give you a title. Like for example, now here it tells you to enter what? Enter age. Of course, that is age. The title, we can say it's age. Then the input text, we say that enter age of what? The employee. Allow me just to shorten. Then now we have the error alert. So under the error alert, you can decide to use any of the style. It can be a stop, it can be a warning, or it can be information. And of course, under style, what defines the style is the icon that comes here. Like for example, now a warning will come with that icon, stop will come with this one. Assuming that we just say it's a warning. Then again here, the title is age. So for example, somebody who does not understand what we should enter, we say that now under age, we say that age must fall, age must be between 18 and 40. So that the person who will be using these worksheets will be able now to understand that I've entered 42 and the system is generating an error. So what am I supposed to do? So let me just click OK. Then thereafter, I come here and say the age is 50. Now you can see it is guiding me that this is the title. Then it's telling me that under the message, age must be between 18 and 40. So when I come here and say 35, it will actually now accept. The same case now with the academic qualification, you can do the validation. Then you also come to validation of basic pay, assuming that you're just working on a simple payroll system and probably you are paying the casual workers and there are so many, and you don't want a scenario whereby when you are capturing the pay information, probably you miss out a digit or you actually enter an extra digit. Remember when you type 10,000, let me just do it. When you type 10,000, yeah, and probably you again type 100,000. So for example, now in this scenario, assuming that you are to pay, if you have a manual system and probably you are not an expert, then it means the final computation, probably you'll see that it will pay more. But of course, when again you are analyzing the payroll data before you post, there are things that you'll of course be able to tell that this is too much and this is actually, it's outside our range. But the best model or the best approach is just to highlight and you specify that under age, under salary, under basic salary, the validation should actually be under salary. You want to accept a whole number or maybe a decimal number. A decimal number is the one that has decimals between, probably you are paying your staff, the casual staff, between 25,000 to 45,000. So basically, this is what it means by validation, so that at any given time, if you enter data that is completely outside the range, the system will not accept that data. So what it means that the quality of the data that you'll be capturing, it will be of quality. So that is under data validation. So what I did here is that I have another worksheet. I have a worksheet here. I'm basically calling this worksheet payroll. And what I basically want us to discuss again under this worksheet is the if function. Like for example, after we have prepared our worksheet and we have the necessary validation, now we have captured the employees. Like my first employee is Kevin. The gender is male. He's married. He belongs to ICT department. He's earning a basic salary of 45,000. He has a diploma as his qualification, that is academic qualification. So now here, if you want to pay or if you want to calculate house allowance for this particular employee, and the formula for getting the house allowance is 5% of basic pay, then of course what we'll be doing is that we'll come here and compute 5% of the basic pay. Then we have another column, we call it commute allowance. Probably now for our case, commute allowance, we are going to use an if function. Yeah. Now this if function, we are saying here that basic salary, which is greater than 50K, the employee will get a commute allowance of 5% of the basic salary. But if the basic salary of this employee is less than 50,000, then this employee is going to get a commute allowance of what? 7.5%. Then likewise, we also want to simulate relief. And allow me to just mention that what we are basically doing is that we are just learning concepts, and this one will not actually apply when you are modeling a payroll system, because I know accountants will be asking me, this is not how we compute house allowance, this is not how we compute relief and all that, but this one is purely just for learning the functions. Now for the relief, we are being guided that here, those employees who are male and they are married, we assume that they have higher responsibilities and they're entitled to a relief allowance of 5,000. But those employees who are female and they're married, we give them a relief allowance of 4,000. But for all the singles, we give them what? An allowance of 2,500. Then again, under academics, we also promoting the culture of improving the skill sets. Of course, at our workplace, we are also encouraged that we need to advance in our academics. And probably this is the model that we have, that on a monthly basis, we'll be giving out an allowance called an academic allowance. But this allowance will be based on your academic qualification. Like we are saying that for employees whose qualification is PhD, they will get an allowance of what? 15,000. For those ones who belong to the masters, they'll get 10,000. Degree holders will get 7,500. Diploma holders will get 5,000. And the other qualifications, probably certificate, advanced certificate and all that, or probably KCSE, they'll just be getting something small that is 2,500. And probably now we'll be computing the totals here. So now here, for the house allowance, because we have been guided that it's just a percentage. Now, basically, how we are going to approach it is that we'll just say that house allowance is equals to 5%. You just type 5% times the basic pay. So when you press enter, now you realize that it has calculated the basic, it has calculated the house allowance of the first employee called Kevin, who earns a basic of what? 45,000. Then, because now in Excel, we can copy the formula. Once we get the formula for the first employee, we just copy the same. So Excel will be able now to calculate the basic, will be able to calculate the house allowance for all the employees. Now, the second one, which is commute allowance, now we are being guided that this commute allowance, it is not just paid as a flat rate, but it is paid based on the basic salary. And here we have a guide that says that where a basic salary is greater than 50,000, you compute it as what? 5%. But a basic salary that is less than 50,000, you compute it at what? 7.5%. Now, this is where we are now going to use a function called if function. So we'll simply say that is equals to if, then we open the brackets. Then now our basic salary, it is actually in a cell, this cell, for the first employee, is in the cell called E3. And I'm assuming that we are able to understand what we call by cell referencing. So if the basic salary, which is in the cell E3, is, let me use less than 50,000, then we put a comma. Now we know that if that is the case, we are now going to compute the commuter allowance as what? 7.5% times the basic. But what if this basic salary is greater than 50,000? And that is why now we have the comma, which will now take care of what? The rest. Like now, if the salary, it is more than 50,000, of course, now we'll subject commute allowance as 5% times basic. And of course, we close the bracket and we press enter. So in this case, we have already computed, and you are able now to see here on the formula bar, the formula that we have written. And what I mentioned, that this cell called E3, it actually represents what? The basic salary. So if we press enter, now we can see that it has computed the commuter allowance for this employee called Kevin. So we also copy the same formula. So this is the if function. Now again, we have another allowance called relief. But now this relief, it's a bit tricky because they are saying that they are comparing two variables. They are looking at the gender of the employee as well as the marital status. So it's not like the commute allowance whereby we're only considering one factor, that is the basic salary. So basically here what we are saying is that if an employee is male and married, we'll subject him to, he will get a relief allowance of 5,000. But for employee who is female and married, he gets 4,000. But the rest of the employees, they will get what? A relief allowance of 2,500, regardless of the gender. So that is actually now probably the formula that you have been given to implement. So now here, what we are now going to do, remember here we used a single if, because we just said that if basic salary is less than 50,000, then this is how we are going to compute. But now here, because we are now going to compare two variables, that is the gender and the status, we'll simply say that is equals to if and. So this function will compare the two variables. Now we say that if and, if gender is equals to male, comma, allow me just to correct this, it's a capital male, comma, and again, marital status is equals to married. Then we close the bracket, comma. Then what should we give? We'll give an allowance of what? 5,000. Else, if that is not the case, again, we do the second comparison. We say, comma, if and. Now we say that if gender is equals, now this time around, we are saying that it's married. The gender is female, sorry. The gender is female. And marital status is what? Married. Then we give an allowance, that is relief allowance of 4,000. But because now, if you are not married and probably you belong to the other gender, we say that you'll only be subjected to a relief allowance of 2,500. Then we close the brackets. Of course, we have, this is now the outcome. And if I just take you back to the formula so that you are able to at least have an internal, you can internalize. Up here in the formula bar, we are saying that if and, if gender is equals to male and marital status is equals to married, we give a relief allowance of 5,000. If not the case, then again, our second case is if gender is female and marital status is married, we give what? 4,000. Else, we give 2,500. Now, when I copy this formula, you'll be able to see those employees who are getting 5,000, and of course they are male and they are married. So if I happen to change this employee called Eugene, his gender now to be single, of course, his relief allowance will actually now come down to 2,500. So the beauty with Excel is that if you make any changes on any of the entries, it will also affect the outcome, which is positive. So you only make a change once and it affects the rest. So this is now what we call a nested if function. There is an if and we are basically comparing two variables, that is the male and the marital status. Then under academic allowance, we are actually mentioning that for the employees whose qualification is PhD, they'll get an academic allowance of 15,000. Those ones who belong to masters, they will get 10,000. Those ones with the degrees, they'll get 7,500. Diploma holders, they'll get 5,000. And other employees, other qualifications, they're already entitled to 2,500. Now, remember here, we're only comparing one variable called academics. Like under relief, we are comparing two variables, that is gender and marital status. Now here under the PhD, we are now going only to concentrate on the academics. But of course, we have how many cases? We have around 5 cases. Now here, what we are going to say is that we'll say that if academic qualification is equals to what? Our first case is PhD. Then, if you fall under that category, you'll get 15,000. Else, let me type it in the formula bar. Else, if academic qualification is equals to masters, you get what? 10,000, comma. Else, if academic qualification is equals to degree, comma, you get 7,500. Else, if your academic qualification, that is academic qualification is diploma, then you get 5,000. Else, now the last case, we are being told that for others, we give 2,500. But again, let me just modify it to have a case whereby we will have those ones who don't get anything, assuming that we have like, let me just say, let me just end it at that point, 2,500, but there's something that I will also explain. Now, in terms of the number of if functions, the number of brackets that we need to close, we have, here we have the first if, the second if, the third if, the fourth if, and it means that we need to close with how many brackets? Those are the brackets that we need to close with. So here, if I paste the same formula, now I'll be able to see that there's an employee by the name Winnie. She's getting an academic allowance of 15,000. Of course, now this one means that she's a PhD holder. Then for the 10,000, that is masters. Let me just have one masters. Sorry. In my formula, actually I indicated that for masters, it is not 1,000. So I just need to come here and review my formula that, like, of course, here it's showing 1,000, which means my formula is not correct. So I'll just come and say that if this employee has a PhD is 15, masters is 10,000. So I'll just come and add a 0 there. Then I enter my formula, then I copy. So you can now see an employee by the name Cynthia she's getting an academic allowance of 10,000. Now, what I wanted to demonstrate that I didn't include here is, like, for example, now there are scenarios whereby somebody might pick a qualification that is not in our list. Like now here, instead of saying that others, we say that we are now specific. Others means certificate. Like now we say that certificate holders will get 2,500. But for those ones who are not, who are below certificate, then they will not get anything. Probably they get a 0. So now what it means is that I'll come and modify my function and say that if diploma holder, he gets 5,000. Else, if this employee has certificate, then he will get 2,500. Sorry, he will get 2,500. Else, any other qualification that is not indicated here, then it means this employee should get a 0. So now if I amend my formula to read like this, then it means any employee whose academic qualification will not fall under the categories that we have stated, he will get an allowance which is 0. Like now, assuming that we come here and say that this employee is the highest qualification is KCSE. Of course, now based on our formula, this employee will not get any allowance. So this is actually the formula. And don't worry about this formula. We are also going to share the tutorials on how to master the same, so that going forward, probably if you have just been relying so much on if you have not been using these formulas, of course, now you'll be in a position to adopt. So this is the change that I mentioned, that for certificate holders, they'll be getting 2,500. And probably let me just change one of the employees to have certificate qualification. So the end results, you'll see that now this employee by the name Shadrach, he'll get an academic allowance of 2,500. Now, if we want now to total all the payable, the total payable, probably let's call it now the net or the net. We just now want to sum up, that is the basic salary plus house allowance plus commute allowance plus relief plus academic allowance. Then thereafter we copy the same. And as I had mentioned, is that this is not how we model a payroll system, but for purposes of validation, we talked of data validation. And again, we are now using some functions here, like the if function. Allow me just to demonstrate that this is how you can model your data. So the if function, we have demonstrated the if function. And probably now, we can try to do more analysis, or probably we want also to do a bit of, we want to get some insights based on this data in terms of probably now we want to get, we want to perform some function called minimum, then maximum, and probably average. Now, for example, let me just copy these two functions and I bring them down here. And let me just retype minimum, maximum, and average. Now, this being payroll data, we may wish to know who earns the lowest salary, who earns the maximum salary, and who earns the average salary. Now, in Microsoft Excel, we have a function called minimum. We call it min function. We just say it's equals to min. Minimum function, which is already here. Now, we want to get the minimum basic pay. So basically what we are saying here is that we want to get the minimum basic salary for all the employees. So I'm just highlighting. So when I press enter, it will tell me that the minimum salary that you are paying for our employees is 35,500. How about the maximum? So we have a function called max, which returns the maximum value. So again, we open the brackets, and again, we select the range of cells. Like now here, we're also selecting the range of cells. Then it will now give us the employee who is earning the highest salary, which is 87,560. But how about the average? Yeah, the average salary. Then again, we have a function called average. And again, we are picking the average for basic salary. Then we'll now be able to get this. So from this point, we are able now to say that this is how the basic salary is paid across board. And the minimum salary that we pay is 35,500. The maximum salary is 87,560. And the average salary is 54,632. So basically, based on the data that we have made some insights, we have done some analysis. And for example, now assuming that I work in HR department, of course, I will be able now to know that our employees, they earn between, in terms of basic salaries, between 35,000 to 88,000. So even during interviews, of course, I'll be aware that these are the trends. And of course, the average is 54,632. So it is important that we understand how to at least use the basic function, that is the mean, the maximum, and average. And again, I also understand that some of us, we work with the ERP systems, or let me call them the core banking systems, or even the accounting softwares. And most of the time we generate data from the systems, and once we have the data, that is it. But the information that we generate in terms of reports, we can subject the same to a bit of analytics so that we are able to get some insights. So I don't know whether I can pause for some questions before I proceed on to the pivot table and probably the subtotals. So maybe let me just pause at that point so that I can pick up some questions before I proceed. If there are any questions, please. Again, I will still use, I will use the same data. As an accountant or as a financial analyst, this information needs to be analyzed further, whereby you will be in a position now to make more insights. I want to introduce something called SUM-IF function. Then I will introduce what we call the pivot table. These are now the two functions that I'm going to demonstrate. assuming that I'm the accountant and I've been asked a question by the CEO to give summary report on all the earnings for a certain department. Like here, we cannot be able to tell that ICT department, the total basic pay they earn is this, the total house allowance is this, and all that. So in Excel, we have a function called subtotal. We have a function called subtotal. So this function will basically help you to understand some groupings. If you subject this data to some analytical analysis, it will now help you to understand how much money is spent per department. Allow me to copy this data to another sheet so that we can perform those functions. I've just copied this data and allow me to just format it to this format. For us to apply subtotal, we need to understand which totals do we want. We want the totals for employees per department. Like now, our first employee, Kevin, he works in ICT. The second one works in accounts. The other one works in finance. But for us to use the subtotal function, we first of all need to sort this data. Sorting means you arrange data in a format that you arrange data in ascending or in descending order. If I select this data, then I sort. I click on sort. I want to sort this data based on what? Department. And I want to adopt what we call the order, that is A to Z. So it means the department that starts with A will be ranked top, while the ones that probably start with Z will be at the bottom. So when I click on sort, now you can see that it has sorted my employees' records in this particular order, that is accounts, audit, finance, then ICT. So now, if I select this data, then I go to home, I click on data, then I click on subtotal. The system will now prompt me. I want to get subtotals. So here I will say that at each change of department, so of course here we have the first department is accounts, audit, finance, and ICT. At each change of department, I want to use a function called sum to add up the basic salary, academic, house allowance, commute allowance, net. That is we can't sum up the academic, sorry, it's just basic salary, house allowance, commute allowance, academic allowance, and finally the totals. So when I click on OK, the system will actually now perform the subtotals. And from here, I'm able to report that for the accounts department, the total basic salary that we pay is, you can format these figures so that they can have the commas. So you are now able to make some insights in that accounts. The total basic pay we pay for accounts is 419,000. The total house allowance is 20, commute allowance, and the total. And the same case applies to, that is audit, applies to finance. And down here we have the ICT and the grant total. So the grants total for the basic salary is 1.3, and the net, the total salary that we pay is 1.8. So at least I'm able to get some insights. But of course, imagine a scenario whereby you are managing, let me say, 200,000 records. You find that this function, it will not be appropriate. This function for the subtotal, it can only apply if the number of records there you are able to see them on the screen. But if you have like even when you talk of 1,000 records, then this function will not basically be ideal. So, and that is why I want to introduce you to a function called, I just want to remove the function. I want to introduce a function called SUMIF function. Now, for example, with this data, remember some of the analytics we are going to do when we're doing business data analytics, we may not really be required to give out a report, but we can just do some analytics, then we come up with a figure. Like now here, the SUMIF function. Now we have departments, we have accounts, we have another department called audit, we have another department called finance, and finally we have a department called ICT. Now in this scenario, we just want the net salary. Let me call it net salary. Net salary. Net salary paid for accounts department, audit department, finance department, and ICT. Now here, we'll say SUMIF. Let me just say that SUMIF, then we say sum the basic salary if the department is what? Accounts. Sorry, just allow me to check. Let me use the accounts. Okay, just a minute with the, we are saying that okay, now we are saying that we only want to do a sum. Just a minute. We are saying that we're only going to we're only going to get the sum function for employees who fall under the accounts department. Now, let me just rewrite the function. We said that sum if, then we're now saying that we are summing sum if sorry for that. Let me just leave that for a bit. I'll need just to confirm something. Now, what we are saying is that this data that we have, we basically need to analyze it in a scenario whereby we need to understand how much salaries we pay for the staffs in each and every department. Now, there's this function called insert function. There's not a function, there's this what we call the pivot table. Remember the subtotals that we did here, we noted that if you have a large data, like for example, 1,000, then that function will not basically be ideal. Now, under the pivot table, if you come here to insert pivot table, so there are we have a guide for the pivot table, whereby now we say that we will create a pivot table and we want to use the existing data. So this existing data is actually this data. So we click on this data, we go to insert pivot table, then it will ask, choose where you want the pivot table report to be placed. Now here, we can create the pivot table in the existing worksheet, which is actually the worksheet on the screen. So we say that we want our pivot table to be put here. Let me click in this particular cell. Then from there, I say, okay. So now here, we have been provided with the pivot table fields, which are the fields that we have in what? In our worksheet. So here we have the fields. Like now we want the salaries for each and every department. Now I will drag this field called department, then I drop it under the column. Because I want the net, that is the total basic pay, I'll drag the basic salary and drop it under what we call the values. When you are dropping this particular column, we can have it either in let me say we can have it under column or even under row. Let me use the row. So if I put it under the row, I'll just come and close. So basically the system has computed for us the total basic pay paid per what? Paid per department. Like we noted that the other time, accounts department, they are paid 419. Audit department, they are paid 247. Finance department, they are paid, that is 347,000. Then ICT, 325, and this is the total. And here we have only picked one field. We have only picked one field called the basic salary. We can decide to have all the fields picked. So let me just do the repeat. Let me just delete and again explain about the pivot tables. So pivot tables will actually analyze your data and give you some statistics in terms of the summaries. Assuming that the employees' data, the information that we have here, assuming that we have like 1,000 records, and at one point we want to get some insights of the totals per department and all that. So we are saying that the best practice is to use these advanced pivot tables And pivot tables, they are found on this menu under insert. Then we have the pivot table. So now here I want to recreate the pivot table that will give me now statistics, summaries for house allowance, commuter allowance, relief, academics, and the net salary. So what I'll simply do, I'll click inside my data. I go to insert, then I click pivot table. Then here, the system will guide me. Do you want to use a new sheet, or you just want the report or the pivot table in the existing worksheet? So I'll say that I want it in the existing worksheet. Then again, I'll be prompted to select the location. Where do you want this table to be? I click, I want it to be on the top here. Then I click what? Okay. So when I click OK here, now I need to come and choose my fields. And here we have filter, we have columns, we have the rows, and we have the values. So now here, I'll pick department because I want the summaries. I want the summaries for each department under the row. Then on the columns, I will come and say, give me the summaries for the basic salary. So I'll just click and drop it under values. I will also come and drag and drop. I will also want summaries for commuter allowance. I also want for relief, and probably the net. So when I click close, now I'll be able to see my summaries here. So whether you are managing 1 million records, 1,000 records, when it comes to pivot tables, you'll be able to get statistics within the shortest time possible. So this is basically the pivot table. And at this point, just allow me to do some recap from where we started for those who joined a little bit late, so that we can again, we can call it a day. So in this lesson, we were discussing about how to analyze data and even how to capture data. And the first aspect we discussed was about data validation. And we mentioned that any data that we capture, it must be accurate, it must be correct, so that any results from the analysis that we are going to get will help us to make the right decision. And we mentioned that we have, if you have, for example, data that you want to capture under employee name, department, date of birth, employment date, gender, marital status, age, academics, and basic salary, you can come up with what we call a setup. A setup basically will help you to define the nature of data that you want to store. Like under departments, we are saying that these are the only departments. Anytime we are hiring or anytime we are capturing data for this particular reason, we're only going to have employees fall in 3 in 4 departments. Then of course our gender will be either male or female, under M and F, marital status, married or single, academic qualification, diploma, degree, or master's. And we mentioned that for the validation, what we simply need to do is that if you want to validate the data, you just highlight the columns, the column where you want to key in your data. Then you go to data, that is the the menu data, then you go to validation and you click on data validation. So under data validation, you can now see that you can select the controls, the sets of data that probably you want, either value, whole number, list, date, length, etc. Then once you set that, you will now be able to key in data that is correct. Then again, we also looked at modeling. We modeled the simple payrolls application, and we mentioned that we were given a guide. Yeah, we were given a guide that this is the information concerning our employees. That is the employee name, gender, marital status, department, basic salary, and academics. Then we are told that we'll be computing the house allowance as 5% of the basic pay, of which the formula is just to say that it's equals to 5% times the basic salary. Then for the commuter allowance, we were given a guide that for employees who earn less than 50,000, they'll get an allowance of 7.5% of the basic. And those ones who earn more than 50,000, then they get a lower percentage, which is 5%. And for relief, I think here for the relief, we mentioned that we are using what we call a nested if function, or we are comparing two variables, that is the marital status together with the gender. And we we noted that and the marital status, and this is what we were able to build up. We said that that if gender is male and marital status is married, they get an allowance of 5,000. Where else, if the gender is male and marital status is married, they get an allowance of 4,000. And for all single, regardless of the gender, they get 5,000. For the PhD, that is for allowance. Sorry, for academic allowance, we were given a criteria whereby for the PhD holders, they'll get an academic allowance of 50,000. For the masters, they get 10,000. For the degree holders, 7,500. For diploma, 5,000. For certificate, 5,000, 2,500. And we were able to model the same. And here we just got the totals. And finally, what we discussed is that if you want to make some insights about this data, probably this information, you are just given the data and you did the processing, and you want to understand what is the minimum basic salary, what is the maximum basic salary, and what is the average salary. We mentioned that we have these three functions. The first one is the mean function. And for you to get the mean function, you just say is equals to mean function. Then you select the range of cells. And for our case, we selected the entire range of basic salary, which returned a minimum salary of 3,500. And the maximum salary, that is the max function, it returned 87,560. And the average salary, it returned 54,632. Then, of course, the next question was, from this data, how much do we pay for individual departments? How much basic paid, we pay for probably accounts, audits, ICT, etc. We say that what we need to do is that we use what we call the pivot table. A pivot table will enable you get those summaries, and we mentioned that in the pivot table, you simply click in the data that you want to use to get your data. And of course, you'll select, you want the same data in the same worksheet. Of course, you are also at liberty to select a new worksheet. Probably you don't want the summaries to be in the same worksheet. So here I'm demonstrating by taking a new worksheet, then you click OK. Then in this new worksheet, I mentioned that now here you'll pick the summaries, or you'll pick the fields. Like one of the key fields that we want to get analysis is for departments, and we'll bring the department under the rows. Then thereafter, under the values, we can pick the basic salary, we can pick the house allowance, we can pick commute allowance, we can pick probably the total. And again, in this values, assuming that we also want the counts, like for example, based on the information that it has been generated here, you can see we don't have the field for the count. So we can also say we also want to count the employees. Probably now we count the names, but now under the names, the function that the system has applied is what we call the count function. So here we have count employee names. So the count will basically tell you that for accounts department, we have 8 staff. Audit department, we have 5. Finance department, we have 6. And ICT department, we have 6 employees. And of course, we can format this data by introducing the 1000 separator so that we can easily make insights about it. So once you have this information, you can now print and use it to make decisions. So basically, that is it for this particular lesson. So I want to take this opportunity to give it back to Bwana Dennis. We can pick up questions, and thereafter we conclude. Thank you very much.